All right, friends, we are back in action. Now it gets serious. Yes, we talked about 4 games for week 0, about 4,000. That's a stretch, but there are dozens of games in week 1, and we're here to break it down. I'm betting you we're going to go for the marquee games here. I let people know we'll talk about, maybe we'll have a second episode if you guys want it. You let us know in the comments, likes, and maybe we'll fire up one for the egregious schools because there's a lot of big-time spreads. But we are here to give you a deep dive on week 1. I am Ben Rasa. That is Matt Gajewski. You guys know the drill. This is Betting You at Odd Chopper. We couldn't be more excited. We're going to look backwards, forwards, everything in between. Sir, week 1, a lot of grease. How you feeling? A lot of grease.
There is. Non-conference every year is like this. You get the wide spreads in these non-conference matchups, the dreaded, in my opinion, FBS, FCS. Those should be spring games, not real games that count towards your season, but we have a slew of them. But it's still fun. We have a lot of marquee games still on the slate that we can focus on. We have Boston College, Florida State, LSU, USC, Notre Dame, A&M, Miami, Florida, Penn State, West Virginia, Georgia, Clemson. So there's still a lot of really fun games to talk about. And you know me, I do love the grease. Don't let me talk any sort of smack about like Coastal Carolina, Jacksonville State. I love those games. It's just when we bring in the FCS, things get a little bit screwy for some of these schools.
So there's a handful of games on Thursday. Most of them are FCS. We're not going to dive into all of them, but we'll get the main ones. And like I said, we're going to hit the marquee as well. Before we do that, though, I want to ask you quickly. We always like to, I'm betting you, go backwards first. Real quick. Again, it was only 4 games. How was your week 0?
It was a 2-3 finish. A little disappointed with myself. The 2 units that I ended up actually taking down were on New Mexico. Just a real weird game overall. They have the 2 defensive scores. They still, although they were probably the worst team, they were not 14 points worse. So I still disagree with it. That was crying a little bit over that outcome. But I broke some of my rules, which I should have just known better. I generally don't mess around with the big 40-point spreads.
That was on me.
A lot of them we have in week
fault.
1. Well, you didn't plan the hurricane, so there is that in your favor. But that wasn't the only dumb thing Hawaii did. Their first 2 drives, they had 3rd and 1s in a hurricane. And instead of running the ball against an FCS team and a horrific FCS team, they decided to try and throw into the hurricane. So there's some moronic coaching decisions that need to be evaluated for Hawaii. And the whole them not showing anything, they don't run the ball anyway. So what are you avoiding, like in your playbook, by running the ball on 3rd and 1? So that was really stupid of me. SMU, that was a complete disaster. And this is just a wrong evaluation. There's going to be wrong evaluations. I thought they were going to be deep enough to beat up on this Nevada team, but that just wasn't the case. And they had some really bad mistakes. They were highly penalized in that game. Their special teams were horrific. You know, they have the botched snap that gives Nevada the ball on the 9-yard line. So they basically just handed them points. I think if you played that back, there's times where maybe they covered the spread, but Nevada's defense played really well, had a lot of pressure on Stone. Stone ended up getting it done in the second half to give them that comeback win. No business that they should have covered that spread. And the only game I didn't bet was Georgia Tech, Florida State, which was a Georgia Tech lean. So should have stuck with my guns there. But how was it for you? Overall, I was a little disappointed in myself.
So it could have been amazing. I had some, I linked up a 3-leg parlay with Georgia Tech, New Mexico, and Hawaii. Didn't get it over the line because not only did they not run the ball on 3rd and 1, like you want to throw, go ahead and then just run it on 4th and 1. Then they punted, which is just literal nonsensical behavior against Delaware State. But that was the biggest. That, and I had some New Mexico money line. They were very fortunate in the game, but they also never should have lost the game with that run out. They had multiple drops to ice the game, and they gave up a 95-yard rushing touch. Just a weird game.
They missed 2 field goals.
Yeah. There was just a lot of nonsense on both sides of that game. All in all, everything I thought was pretty reasonable outside of SMU. That's a run out. Not that I had exposure to that game. That's just a run out I never anticipated. I bet SMU to make the playoff. And although I think they're going to be just fine, they're going to have to play a little better than that. I've got it on good authority. So we turn the page and let's do it right now. Let's go. It is time to dive into the board. We're getting started on Thursday. And let's start with a good game, no doubt about it. It's UNC and Minnesota. The spread is flipped. 2.5s are popping up. Minnesota was the favorite. Now they are the dog. Talk to me about this game. Fascinating one to get us started.
I was a little hesitant with this game coming in. Not sure on either team, a lot of questions, but I think the line movement is stemming from this Darius Taylor injury. And we just have a coach in PJ Fleck who never comments on injuries. The Big Ten forces him to do an injury report. I'm sure he was steadfast against that, but you won't know even who's questionable until 2 hours before kickoff when that's required to come out. But he has missed some practice. They've had a lot of closed practices recently, so we have no idea whether he's out there. He says he's doing well. This is PJ Fleck gamesmanship. Does he mean in his personal life? Does he mean on the field? We don't really know. So I think that's why the line has moved. But I'm not 100% sure that Darius Taylor is even out. He just limped off the scrimmage, and that's all we know. They're also very deep at that position. They added Marcus Major from Oklahoma, Say Bangura from Ohio, Jaron Mangham. He's played at multiple schools. And we saw Taylor miss time last year, and Jordan Newman stepped up. He's still on the team. So I expect this run game to still be pretty good for Minnesota, which is why I'm not all that – I don't really understand why the line has moved so far. They have everyone back on the offensive line. They were a power run game last year, and it didn't change when Taylor was out. So I still think they're going to try to do that. And is Taylor really worth like 3-4 points to the spread? I personally don't think so. And if this is just like an evaluation thing, so be it. But I think UNC has just as many questions. Quarterback, you have Brosmer from New Hampshire facing down against whoever UNC trots out there between, the combination of Jacoby Criswell and Max Johnson. I'm not sure any of them are very good options. Running back is deep for both teams, so this is kind of a wash. You go Amarian Hampton versus Darius Taylor or whatever combination of 4 experienced backs they added behind him. Receiver, I think, is actually closer than people might think. I'd give a slight edge to UNC with J.J. Jones, Nate McCollum, Kobe Pacer, and their dynamic tight end, Bryson Nesbitt. But you still have some pretty good options behind Daniel Jackson. They were really injured last year. Lameek Brockington didn't play the whole year. You have Elijah Spencer. They brought in a premier transfer in Tyler Williams. This kid was an amazing recruit. And then the O-line, I do think there's a drastic advantage that points towards Minnesota. They have everyone back. This is a unit that was decent last year. They were 71st in pass blocking, 37th in run blocking. UNC only has 1 starter back on their offensive line. That was a unit that was a strength for them. Their transfers, I think, leave a little bit to be desired. You've Ja'Kai Leftwich from Georgia Tech, Austin Blasky from Georgia. But then your other transfers are from North Texas and Muhlenberg. They do recruit the O-line pretty well, but you're still either relying on like a really low-level transfer or a really young player. I don't know. Then on the back end, I think both these defensive lines are going to be pretty good. UNC has a strength on the edge. They're very, very unproven at defensive tackle. They have a couple 4- and 5-star, so maybe they just backfill that way. Minnesota basically has a completely returned defense. The only guy I'm worried about them losing is Newman at safety. They added 2 transfers. Neither of them really have a lot of experience. One's from TCU. The other one is a pretty solid Power 5 transfer in Robinson. He's from Bucknell, Robinson, but very good player there. I'm not really worried about UNC passing over the top with those quarterbacks. So if this comes down to just like power run game versus power run game, the defensive tackle weaknesses for UNC, I think, are enough for me to back Minnesota in this spot. Because I'm not really expecting either team to air it out in this game. And I think the better defense overall up front is going to be Minnesota. But we'll see with UNC. They're going to lean on a lot of their depth in their recruiting. I'm not 100% sure they have it. But if you can give me a dog price on this team, that's where I'll take it.
Yeah. I mean, UNC is now not the decisive favorite, but it seems to be trending that way. Maybe Minnesota will test 3. I see it the same way you do. What I like about Minnesota is they're doing naturally what they want to, and that's where they have the advantages. That offensive line, and they'll run the ball 45 times if they can. That's what they want to do. I think that's where they'll have success. So that's where I'm eyeing as well to get us started here.
They also might be able to throw. Like, we don't know on Brosmer.
We don't know.
What if he's like Tanner Morgan when they had a reasonable pass attack? Because Kaliak Manis couldn't throw. We just don't know with Brosmer. That might be in their bag. It might not. I'm pretty sure it's not in UNC's bag.
No. And New Hampshire, for an FCS school, they're perpetually pretty solid. So it's a big step up, but he had some gaudy numbers. Yeah, we'll see. Now, you already mentioned Coastal. Let's talk about Coastal. This is a game I already bet. I dropped it in Discord, and we'll talk about all that as well. But this one's already on the docket for me. I have Jacksonville State in this game. Coastal and Jacksonville State, 2.5-point spread. Interesting matchup. Obviously, the Grayson McCall era, shutters out, and now it's new and different for Coastal. Jacksonville State, I think, is on the upswing. Talk to me about these teams.
Tough game, but one I'm on the same side as you. We got some news yesterday. Unfortunately for Jacksonville State, Ron Wiggins is out 10 weeks. That's the tough part about betting these games early in camp. Sometimes you don't know when guys are hurt, and we're recording this at kind of a unique time because yesterday, most of these teams had press conferences and a lot of them released depth charts. So we got a lot of this information. There were a ton of things that happened. So my apologies if I missed something. Please leave it in the comments. But one thing that was announced is Ron Wiggins is out for 10 weeks. That might be something that people look at. I don't think you really should. Super deep at running back is Jacksonville State. They still have Anwar Lewis. They added Andrew Paul from Georgia, who's a pretty solid transfer for them. And Michael Dukes comes in as well. So I still think you have three-headed monster at least in the backfield, plus what you do at quarterback. We kind of know what Jacksonville State wants to do. They run this really unique offense under Rich Rod. They have multiple quarterbacks with experience. Logan Smothers is back. He had to play at multiple times last year due to injuries in front of him. So depth is important at quarterback. Fortunately, they add Zion Turner and Tyler Huff in the transfer portal. So I think you do have enough depth for this team to be competent. And then on the offensive line, 3 starters return. All 3 of them were very good. As far as replacing the guys you lost, you turn to basically JUCO in Kadarius Small or Cam Jones for Cincinnati. I think that's fine with this team and their propensity to run the ball. They should be fine. You also had a couple guys like Katie Arnold and Devan Harley who played snaps. I think this run game will be just fine. The receiving game should actually be improved, in my opinion. You have Michael Petway and PJ Wells back at receiver, Sean Brown back at tight end. They added some legit like Tarvaris Dawson, formerly of Colorado and Auburn, comes in. Brandon Spector, he was a failure with Clemson, but there's still a pretty good recruit with Clemson. Samaria Rudolph from UAB. There's a pretty damn good receiving core, and I think it's better than what we saw last year. On the other side, Coastal Carolina's defense, I think, is really scary, especially up front. They do return everyone in the secondary that's solid, and while I do like Jacksonville State's receivers, it's more just a situational play for them. This is a power-heavy run team. That's what they want to do. And this Coastal defense, they have 3 back from their front 7. 2 are on the edge. They're extremely weak on the interior. They lost both their defensive tackles, and to replace these guys, we're talking super, super low-level players. Like, I don't even know where some of these players are from. Like, Texas Permian Basin is where one of these transfers is from. Do you know that school?
Not. I thought that was the school in Friday Night Lights. Apparently not. No.
So, I mean, like, the transfers, yeah. Across the board, the transfers for Coastal Carolina are pretty low. I don't have a lot of faith in anything but their secondary, and if you're going to have Jacksonville State able to run, that's one advantage. Then you just turn to offense. Coastal Carolina is replacing Grayson McCall. This team got absolutely pillaged in their portal. Their top 2 receivers are gone. Pinckney graduated. Jared Brown's at South Carolina. You added Malik Mega, Seneca McKee, Andre Jones, really low-level transfers. You do have 4 starters back on the offensive line. That wasn't really a strength for this team last year. I think they'll be okay, but they were 54th in pass blocking, 115th in run blocking. Their 2 transfers, again, we mentioned the Texas Permian Basin. That's where one of them is from. And then Sawyer Gorham Welch, he comes from Texas, but he's one of the lowest recruits from Texas over the last couple of years, and he was actually recruited to play defensive tackle. Now he's playing on the offensive line. So just major questions. What does this O-line give you? Wasn't good last year. Not sure they can run the ball. Basically, all their running backs were pillaged in the transfer portal. The quarterback battle's still going on. It's Ethan Vasco, who played reasonably well in spots last year, but Tad Hudson, Noah Kim, Who are they throwing to? It's a bunch of trash. I don't know. It's just significant questions with Coastal across the board, whereas Jacksonville State, as I think, is a little more put together. That team actually returns a lot on defense. 4 in the secondary, 1 of the starting linebackers, both the edge rushers. They have a couple of rotational guys at defensive tackle. Plus, they added in a lot of transfers, and some of them come from pretty notable programs. In the secondary, you have players that should be able to get on the field right away, like Michigan State, Minnesota, Notre Dame, Georgia. That's where some of their transfers come in the secondary, which is important if you're Coastal who has to throw the ball a little bit. So anyway, all that said, I'm on Jacksonville State.
Jacksonville State, run it down their throat. Let's get out of there. It's pushing 3. Again, I put it in at 2.5. That's the number I got. Number our insiders got at Discord. One more Thursday game, and then we turn into the big time games. So bear with us. This one is a Ben Rasa special, so we could get in real trouble here. I don't really care. I wanted one game of absolute debauchery on this. This is the game that I've chosen, and you see it right here. I'm talking about Northwestern State against Tulsa. Yes, that's right. Northwestern State against Tulsa. I was looking at games last night. I was breaking them down, and I stopped on this game, and I couldn't figure out what I was looking at. Now, I bet Tulsa at minus 31.5. It's pushed to 33.5 on FanDuel. I'm going to just give you a real quick rundown. Northwestern State last year had an awful situation. A player on their team was shot, and they ended up canceling the season 6 games in. They were horrendous before that. The team was in disarray. The coach resigned. It's a new regime now. A lot of guys got portaled, and it's a mess. They're picked to finish dead last in the Southland, and they take on Tulsa. Tulsa's no good, no doubt about it, but I don't think that this is even remotely the same level of competition. I actually think Tulsa rolls over this team. I'm going to keep it pretty simple, not much more than that. Tulsa's using like 3 quarterbacks. I actually think that's good because they kind of have an ongoing quarterback battle. Let these guys get out there. They'll probably keep their foot on the gas, kind of like preseason NFL where they want guys to showcase. To me, Northwestern State is in a uniquely bad situation. And at 31.5, I'm firing on Tulsa. I know it's bad, but I'm doing it.
I don't have my FCS act together, but I got this text from you last night about this game, and everything you said makes sense to me. I'm going to dive into some player personnel, but when you showed me their transfers, it didn't look promising for them either.
No, they lost 3 transfers who made the jump up. They lost, I believe, 15 transfers that went FCS to FCS. And yes, they brought in a handful of guys. They're like all teams do. But they've done absolutely nothing to replace anyone. The quarterback last year, by the way, I didn't tell you this, was Tyler Vandeval, the guy from Wyoming. Remember that guy? Yeah. He was hanging around there after he flamed out at Idaho State. This is just not a good situation. Sorry to the Demons, who last year I bet them a couple times in college basketball. That's about the extent of what I know about the school. Tulsa wins this going away. Mega going away. I don't spend a lot of time on these, but this is a weird situation. I'm very excited to see what you come up with as you look into this personnel, because for me, I didn't see anything promising.
I have Tulsa done. I don't have them as a horrifying team. Tulsa actually is the number 2 recruiting class in the AAC this year. I have them graded out well above average at quarterback, and I don't think it really matters that much who they use. Their running back position is the deepest on their team. Have their O-line as a question, but they're actually pretty strong on the edge too. Good. That's about it for like great positions. But if you have a couple above average positions and you're playing one of these FCS teams that's a complete dumpster fire, that is more than enough. Yeah. I'm interested to see this Francis character at quarterback for them, but we'll see what goes on. Enough about that. Okay. Those were the Thursday games. Now let's get serious. And before we dive into Clemson and Georgia, which is happening right now, I've alluded a couple times to what we've got going on here at OddsShopper. First of all, if you're not subscribed to this channel, please do that. And if you want this episode, it's available in podcast as well. You can go there. The links are below. Give it a listen while you're exercising or out and about. You're in the car. Great time to listen to Betting You. But an even better time is if you want. We're alluding to lines that we've got in our Discord. It's right here in this marketplace. You go to OddsShopper, you click it, and it's going to bring you right into this screen.
you will get right to the insiders page, and you're going to see some of these. You go, oh, I want college football. Well, you've got me. And all these, obviously, Matt is here as well. We have our channels and our packages up and available. You get into our individual Discords. You get to get these lines early. Absolutely worth the price of admission if you are serious about betting college football. And for me, a lot of other very, very egregious sports. But the links are below for both of us. We would love to see you in there. Cannot stress enough how much it adds up over time to get access to lines and data and injuries right off the bat. So shout out to what they built here in this marketplace. Links are below. We'll see you in there. Now, are you ready to talk some real high-end stuff here? We got Clemson and Georgia. I believe the game's in Atlanta. 13.5-point spread. You know, what's going on with Dabo and co? Obviously, I don't want to say he's on the hot seat, but I have no faith in Clemson this year. Do you have any situation or angle in this game? Break it down for me.
I do like this game. It's one of the better games overall on paper. But yeah, Dabo, he's built up a lot of goodwill. He's shown the ability to adapt. He's just chosen not to at the portal yet. I think this is basically his last stand. If Clemson disappoints for the 5th straight year, this is 5 straight years now, they have finished below where they were ranked preseason. There's going to be some pressure on him to make some changes, and he probably will. That's to be seen. This team went 9-4 last year. I think that's about where they finished. You look at their season, they had a lot of things happen that you'd consider unlucky, probably regress year to year. Ton of single-digit games. This team was number 2 in the country, or excuse me, number 3 in the country in fumbles lost, behind only Nebraska and Texas State. Turnovers that did not go their way, and then so many injuries for this team. Only 2 of their offensive linemen played the whole year. Antonio Williams got hurt after just 5 games. On defense, they had a ton of guys miss games. Makuba missed 2, Mickens missed 3, Wiggins missed 2, Terrell missed 3. That's not all of them either. So it's a really tough season to evaluate for Clemson. The fumbles, the injuries. With that said, they had really, really gross games that they played. Their offense was non-existent through durations of the season, probably some of that having to do with the O-line receiver injuries. And Klubnik sprained his ankle that he played through as well. Georgia basically was unscathed the whole year, and then they play Alabama in what was largely just a coin flip game. That game, they basically were identical in yards per play, but they have the only turnover and they missed a field goal. They also fumbled on their own 17 that immediately gave Alabama a field goal. That ended up being the difference in who made the playoff, which is just crazy here. But moving forward from last year's nonsense, what do these teams do in the offseason? How do their rosters look? This Clemson team is very different. They had a ton of outgoing production, especially on defense, and they did nothing to backfill it outside of their recruits, as we know is kind of their tendency. But here's who's gone. Jeremiah Trotter, stud linebacker. Makuba, corner. Nate Wiggins, corner, stud. He's in the NFL. Xavier Thomas on the edge. Tyler Davis on the interior. Ruka Horohor on the defensive tackle. Justin Maskell on the edge. Jalen Phillips at safety. Sheridan Jones at corner. So those are just their top 15 snap getters. That's all the players that are gone. A couple defensive players that were rotational left as well in the transfer portal or graduated. They have no transfers. They're just standing on business on this defense. The secondary up front, ton of potential concerns. Now, they do have elite recruits, but man, that is an absolute ton to replace. And you look at Georgia, they actually aren't replacing that much for a team that's perennially national title contender on offense. The unit that's going to exploit this defense, Beck is back, one of the best quarterbacks in the country. They lose Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers. Both those guys were hurt last year. Ladd McConkey barely played. So you return with Dominic Lovett, Dylan Bell, Arian Smith. Great place to start. They had Colby Young for Miami, London Humphreys for Vanderbilt, Ben Yarosik from Stanford. Just elite players to fill those skill position players. You go in the portal and you add in Trevor Etienne. Now, I think there's a pretty good chance that Trevor Etienne is suspended for this game. Kirby won't comment on it. He's one of the players that was arrested this offseason, and there might be some suspensions for some of these driving things. You're just flat out not going to know till kickoff. I'm not really that worried, though. There's a ton of depth at these positions. Even if Roderick Robertson, who had toe surgery, is out too, like everyone on this team is a 4- and 5-star recruit. Branson Robinson was banged up last year. Like he's just waiting in the wings. This guy would start on probably like 100 teams in the country. Your offensive line returns 5 guys with starting experience because of some of those injuries last year. They do lose Cedric Van Pran and Amarius Mims, but Amarius Mims only played in 7 games. It's a very, very experienced offensive line. So Georgia's going to score. Can Clemson keep up with them? I think they can do their part enough. They have made upgrades on offense. We mentioned all those injuries in the offensive line. That allowed a lot of guys to accrue experience. They are high recruits. Generally, the coaching's been pretty good with Clemson, so I think they will be better. The receivers are certainly better. You just get back Antonio Williams from injury. Tyler Brown's a year older. He was the leader of this team. They have a couple elite recruits, 5 stars and 4 stars. TJ Moore and Bryant Westco are the 2 names to mention there. They do return their tight end. And then I think we saw probably just the bottom of a Garrett Riley offense. This was supposed to be the best offensive coordinator hire in the entire country last year. And injuries, whatever it was, they certainly disappointed. But I think both these teams are going to pass the ball a fair amount, pretty balanced. Both of them are above average in pace. Georgia's going to score on this Clemson makeshift defense. If Clemson can even do remotely close to their part, and I think just with health and better players, they probably can. I like an over. I took a 47.5. It went up to 49 and it had some buyback. So actually there's some pretty good numbers in the market right now.
Yeah, I definitely don't have a side. You mentioned the total. Yeah, I see a 48.5 on my screen right now. And you can shop it for sure. I get that. I see that. I don't really have interest in backing Clemson at 13.5, and I'm not particularly looking to lay the points either. Good game, maybe a total, like you mentioned. That's something I hadn't really considered.
So that right now, the total has the score at 31-17.5. So if you're telling me we needed a 31-18 score, that seems pretty reasonable.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's scenarios where Georgia pushes 35, 40 points themselves. And Clemson will score at times. Maybe they won't. What do I know? But I think it'll be a pretty interesting. What do I know about Clemson? They're an enigma. But all right, here we go. Penn State and West Virginia. This spread has come down quite a bit. I'm interested to see what you view this. It's 7.5 on the screen right now. Penn State is, of course, favorite, but a lot of love for West Virginia, and I'm a big fan. There's a lot of discrepancies in the market. Look at this on FanDuel, let's say. Some of these, 8.5 there. So you want to keep an eye on what you're getting and make sure you're getting the best line. But in general, do you think Penn State is on quote-unquote upset alert, or is West Virginia maybe a little overhyped?
It's gone too far for me. I don't know, man. I was hoping to get close to, so I waited on this. I liked West Virginia in the beginning, did this with a couple teams, and then did it with Georgia Tech last week. And then I just can't buy this number. This West Virginia team is slaughtered by Penn State last year.
Yes.
Now, there are some differences with these teams. I think a lot of Penn State's handicap just kind of hinges on what they do with their offense. You have Kotelnicki coming in from Kansas. Can he revitalize this offense? Because it was a complete disaster last year. They had some good skill position players, but they just throw the ball down the field. If you look at Drew Aller, he didn't really have a lot of turnover-worthy plays, which actually, in my models, creeps him all the way to 21st in efficiency. But, turnover-worthy plays are extremely negative in your grading, and they just didn't ask him to do anything, which kind of came at the expense of the offense. I don't like their receivers whatsoever. I'm not even sure they have a lot of legitimate Big Ten receivers on the team. I've seen a lot of people try to hype up Wallace as a guy that was injured for a bit last year. Perhaps he can play better, but their best player is probably Julian Fleming. He's a player that flamed out at Ohio State. Now, that's not always a bad thing. We've seen Jamison Williams do it, but after that, say Fleming and Wallace do hit, who are we looking to next? Penn State has recruited some 4-stars. They basically transferred out because this offense has been horrible. I truly don't know what the passing game gives you, so it's basically just a bet on Kotelnicki, which generally has been a good one. He's maximized a lot of players in worse situations, but it's at least a question for me. And as well as Drew Aller. Backfield should be awesome. They do lose their 3 best offensive linemen, which is a concern. Both tackles, your center are gone. They do have some very good recruits coming in, but that's at least a question anytime you have some departures like that. Defense is similar. You lose a lot of players in your secondary. Up front, they did lose Chop Robinson, some high-quality players from the front 7. They do have the production and recruiting behind them. It's just a question now. You're relying a lot on youth, on depth. We just don't know. Do these guys live up to recruiting expectations? Probably, but it's an unknown. As for West Virginia, this team was awesome on offense last year, and they run a very weird scheme. Garrett Green finished 9th in quarterback efficiency, and that was with his receiving core being top 10 in drops. Unbelievable how good he was and how good his season could have been if they were a little better there. But their receivers should be better this year, in my opinion. They added quite a bit of talent in the offseason, and they're recruiting as well, too. Like, Farmer's a 4-star for this team. They add Jaden Bray and Justin Robinson. Receiving should be great. Their backfield is just as strong as Penn State's. Jaheim White didn't play in their week 1 game. He's a young player. But now that you have Jaheim White and Donaldson, I think you can stand up to Singleton and Allen. O-line returns 5 with starting experience. They do lose one really good player, at least, in Doug Nestor. I think Zach Frazier, their center, should be considered there too. But Bosley comes in from Jacksonville State, giving you 6 with starting experience. The defense was bad. The secondary was horrific, and they completely rehauled it. They have 2 safeties back, who are actually kind of the strength of their team, but they added 7 transfers. A couple of them started at Northwestern. So good power transfers coming in for this team. Others were starters at Colorado State. That's Crandall, Jacksonville State, Tarnew, Fagan from Charlotte. So they are throwing bodies at the secondary problem. They should not be quite as bad and allow 30-plus points to Drew Aller again like they did last year. So the game is closer than last year for sure, but is it 7.5, 8.5 points? It's too close for me. I'm still going to pass, but it's West Virginia or pass, in my opinion.
West Virginia or pass for me as well. You mentioned Green. Also, the game, big difference. And the line reflects this. This game's in Morgantown. This is a no-joke home field. Yes. I like West Virginia at home generally. They're a very strong team there. They've got bodies. And I think their weakness in that secondary is not particularly exploited that often by Drew Aller. But I was looking for like 10.5 here, and that's not coming back.
It was there, and I thought it was going to move the other way, and I was wrong.
So did I. You live and you learn. But good game, one that could end up on my card. I have not bet it yet.
What do you think about a total?
If I bet a total, I would say under, but I actually kind of like an over here, to be honest.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah, I know.
Both offenses should be slow, but both offenses are explosive. So how do you...
Yeah, it's not a pace play, but I do think both offenses have success. And I really think West Virginia not going to score with ease. They've got weapons. And the Penn State backs, even if they replace those O-linemen, as I'm sure they will, I still think they have an advantage in the trenches up front. So fascinating there. 51.5 is a good number if you're backing. You get 28-24 equity, 31-21 equity. 51.5 at -110. Interesting spot as well. I saw a tweet from you yesterday. First of all, at Matt_Gajewski, at JazzRazBets. Give us both a follow now. That said that Mario Cristobal has hired somebody to basically avoid cataclysmic meltdowns of doing stupid shit on the sidelines. And that is a game-changing situation as we talk about Miami and Florida. A 2.5-point spread for a team that I have serious aspirations for in Miami. Talk to me about that. It seems to be pushing 3. Florida's got the world's hardest schedule. Should be a great game.
Should be a great game. Mario Cristobal hiring a clock management specialist or whatever he called it. I think he's just going to handle like on field, down and distance clock management, when to call timeouts, when to kneel the ball versus running the ball, which would have given Cristobal 2 more wins to his win-loss record through his career. Anyway, let's move to actual roster stuff for these two teams. Home field advantage, it's pretty good for Florida, but this is being played, home state for both teams. I don't think it's going to be quite as drastic as, like a different SEC team coming to town. I think Miami has advantages in most positions. Quarterback, you look between Graham Mertz, 60th efficient quarterback, and Cam Ward, 32nd. Mertz was actually awesome as a passer, over a 70% completion, but he gets dinged because he has no mobility whatsoever. He's a complete pocket statue. And if your defense can generate pressure, it's a huge issue. Whereas Cam Ward, if a defense can generate pressure against him, he has mobility and can escape the pocket. Running back, I think, is a pretty drastic advantage for Miami. Montrell Johnson is hurt. I think it is unlikely he plays in this game for Florida. Whereas Miami added Damian Martinez, one of the best backs in the country, coming over from Oregon State. At receiver, this is tough. Both these teams have elite receivers. So I don't want to give like a drastic edge either direction. For Florida, man, did we get a good season out of Eugene Wilson last year. They bring in Elijah Badger from Arizona State. Jameer Dike reunites with Graham from Wisconsin, and that doesn't even include Khalil Jackson team, plus a bunch of 4 and 5 stars. But Miami is like right there with them, man. We had great play out of Xavier Restrepo, Jacoby George. They bring in a burner in Sam Brown from Houston, and everyone behind these guys is a 4 and 5 star. On the offensive line, I give the edge to Miami. They do lose a couple guys, but I'm not really sure that matters too much. Basically, just they got to replace their center, Matt Lee, because guard Javian Cohen was below average. So they go out, they get the center from Indiana and Zach Carpenter. To replace Cohen, they lean on a former 5-star freshman from last year. Okunlola and the otherwise starters are all awesome recruits, elite players. Mawagoa at right tackle. So Miami should have a very good offensive line. Florida was a big question last year. This unit gave up a lot of pressure. They were 25th in run blocking, but below average in pass blocking. What did they do to change things? They only have 3 starters back, and their transfers and recruits are a little less overwhelming, in my opinion. Pretty underwhelming. Like Brandon Crenshaw Dixon comes in from San Diego State. He's going to start at a tackle spot for this Florida team. I don't know. Devon Manuel's there. They were already worse last year. I don't think quite as much. That's a problem. Defense, I think both these teams are actually going to be pretty good, and especially off the edge. I'd have a slight bet towards Miami being a little bit better, but I think defensive tackle is pretty good for both teams. I think Miami is better at linebacker. The other Mawagoa there. And secondary is probably a wash. This was a huge weakness for Florida last year. They were 1/12th in coverage, but man, did they hammer the transfer portal, bringing in a lot of players. Like, I still don't know. Some of their transfers involve players like Cormani McClain, like a 5-star, but flamed out, had a really bad rap under Dion, made a lot of bad comments about his work ethic and stuff. They're going to need some guys that haven't proven themselves to step up. So that's another concern. Do they get the 5-star play out of a player like Cormani McClain, or are we just leaning back on the guys last year that were susceptible for Florida? I'm in on Miami. I'm in on them in this game. I think anything below 3 is fine. I'm, half interested in some alt line stuff against Florida. And it's not because I don't like Florida. Florida is going to get their coach fired and probably not make a bowl because of their schedule. They're a talented team, but Miami's just that good.
Yeah, I hear you. And Florida, just an absolutely brutal. These are the type of games to save their season they're going to have to win. And I don't really see it either, to be honest. And there are 2.5 still out there. It is pushing 3. So if you're going to do it, it's a little time sensitive, but I'm with you. We're both pretty high on Miami this year. I like what they've done. Just don't screw it up. Coaching staff. A team that I bet the win total on, we're going to need to get this game, and I feel pretty confident that we will. That would be Virginia Tech. They're sitting at kind of that Georgia spread, 13.5. It hasn't touched 14 anywhere. Against Vanderbilt, another team near and dear to my heart. I would hope that Drones and co. have enough to get past Vanderbilt in this spot. Are you worried about this? It's kind of a weird week 1 matchup for them. Or do you think that Virginia Tech really does have this under control?
I'm not really worried about this game very much. Vanderbilt last year was horrific. They went 2-10, and they had a 40% post-game win expectancy against Hawaii. They should have been 1-10, or excuse me, 1-11. The only game they had a positive post-game win expectancy against was Alabama A&M, an FCS team.
I didn't even know they played them. That's just sad.
I couldn't remember until I
thought it was
all
Elon.
my stuff.
I'm just going off memory, but yeah, go ahead.
There's not really any advantage you can point to Vanderbilt. I'm not sure at any position. QB, Drones, I'll take him over Pavia or Nate Johnson, who might play. Running back, pretty clearly Virginia Tech, Bashil Tootin versus Cedric Alexander. Receiver, not even close. Vanderbilt got pillaged in the transfer portal. And some of the guys they brought in, like the Vanderbilt beat has been very good this season. They bring in a guy like Jeremiah Dillon from Ole Miss. He's been running with this team, making a ton of mistakes, according to beat writers. So that's even worse. The guys you brought in to replace, not living up to expectations is a huge problem. O-line, 6 starters back for Virginia Tech. Vanderbilt is 3 back. They were all really, really bad. D-line, Vanderbilt has 4 starters back. Their edges are okay, but their interior is horrible. Virginia Tech wants to run the ball with Drones. I'm not going to continue to go on. It's the same thing at linebacker in the secondary. I still think the best angle in the game might be an under, though. We know how Virginia Tech wants to play. Last year, they were 107th in pass rate and 98th in pace. Vanderbilt brings in New Mexico State's coaching staff kind of on offense. They're changing their offense entirely. So unlike this really weird run-heavy option-style offense, kind of what we saw from Tim Beck at New Mexico State last year, and that makes sense they bring in the New Mexico State guys. Well, that offense was 95th in pass rate and 129th in pace. I love this Virginia Tech defense. They basically brought every single player back, so I'm not sure how Vanderbilt scores. And then if Vanderbilt's playing really slow and run-heavy compared to last year, that's already Virginia Tech's game plan. So I'm interested in an under. I forgot the number I have. Let me see real quick. I believe it's 51 I took.
Yeah, there's a 50.5 on my screen right now. And if you shop this, I think there's some 51s out there. So I get that, actually. This is not something that I bet. I think I'm going to end up joining you on this, though. I really like Virginia Tech's defense. If Vanderbilt doesn't do, self-destructive things, I think they probably just lose like a 31-10 type game, something like that, 28-14. It doesn't feel like, unless there's big time plays, that these teams have like long, it's going to be more methodical than explosive.
I just don't know how Vanderbilt is going to put up a lot of points unless Virginia Tech does it to himself. I said that about the SMU game, and then there's snaps that get botched, and Nevada gets the ball at the 9. So
Ken Seals is not there though, the hero. So
they're going to run the ball. Like every transfer they brought in is basically some sort of like option style quarterback. Pavia, of course, from New Mexico State's the best. Nate Johnson from Utah. They brought in the backup from New Mexico State, Blaze Berlowitz. So I'm expecting a very run-heavy attack.
I forgot about that guy. All right, we got 4 games left. And again, if there are games that we did not get to, in the comments, and we will do a second episode on Thursday for the real egregious games. But it's up to you guys, obviously. We want content. We want to put out content that you guys want. I do want to mention, if you are betting a lot of these games, it's never bad. Take advantage of some of the options out there in terms of getting some bonus bets in the account. Bet365 if they're in your state. You can bet $5 on a game. Win or lose, you get $150 in bonus bets. The link is below. Deposit 10, bet 5, get $150. It's that simple. You do have to be 21 plus, 18 in Kentucky. If you have a gambling problem, please call 1-800-GAMBLER. But very simple. You should click that link and see if it's in your state. Take advantage. I'm not going to spend any more time on it. Just there for you guys. If you're just looking to be aware of the edges out there, all good things for us. Now, one of the cool things about week 1, it doesn't happen on a lot of games, but there are a couple where we've seen a team. And I don't know how much you can take from it, but one of those situations is with Hawaii, who did me no favors, and then there was a hurricane. So I'm going to use that as a partial excuse. 14-point spread, 54.5-point total against UCLA. Talk to me about this game. This is one of the few teams that we have seen a little bit.
We have. I'm not going to overreact to. No. We've seen this bounce all over the place. After that bad performance, UCLA took money. It touched 14. Might still be there in a couple spots. Hawaii's got some pretty significant buyback. And I don't think I want to touch a spread. There's still a lot of concerns I have with Hawaii. They did some real weird stuff with their depth chart that I didn't like. They took one of their starting defensive tackles, moved him to the offensive line, and he started there. So now instead of having, one anchor on their defensive line, they have nobody. They had 3 starters from last year in their secondary, either not on the depth chart or not appearing in week 0. They also didn't have their strong former 4-star Fabian Rasa, who transferred in from USC. He didn't touch the field either. So a defense that when we did our win total show, we projected to have 7 returning starters, went all the way down to 3. And man, it wasn't great. I mean, they played Delaware State. They looked fine, but they allowed enough production where I was significantly concerned with a real team coming to town next week. So I think UCLA scores. I have no real problem with the UCLA offense. I think it's probably the strength of their team. They do a complete 180 on their coaching staff, change everybody. The real concern there is none of them have head coaching experience. So it's Deshaun Foster. He's an RB's coach, in-house guy. Enemy, OC experience at a high level, not that much experience calling plays. We'll get to him in a second. And Malo, he's now the DC. He just has no coaching experience either. So how do they run the program is a big question for me. As far as like the Bieniemy stuff, I'm not 100% sure how this offense is going to look. I think they could be run heavier than we think under Foster. What we saw with the Commanders last year was the #1 pass rate in the NFL. I personally am expecting them to be kind of balanced and play fast. If they're playing against this Hawaii defense, which I don't have a lot of faith in anymore given their changes, I think they're going to score. Garbers has been just fine at quarterback. He was the 51st most efficient signal caller last year. They still have Harden back at running back. I personally think their receivers are improved. They still have Sturdivant and Loya, but they go out and they add a former 4-star Enrico Flores, who was kind of in an impossible situation with Notre Dame last year. 3 starters anchor the UCLA O-line. They have a bunch of transfers that can hopefully fill that depth. They should be able to move the ball against Hawaii. Then on the other side, Hawaii's team is their offense. Again, that weird stuff on the depth chart, they only listed 1 starter from last year, but then the 3 guys who weren't on the depth chart all started and played the whole game. So I have no idea who made that depth chart for them. But they bring back 4 on the O-line. That was a solid unit. The receivers are all back except for Stephen McBride, who joins the team this year, but they still brought back Jonah Panoke from injury. Pofele Ashlock had an awesome game. Tylen Hines returned to kickoff. Shager was the 52nd most efficient quarterback. And the concerns with UCLA are on defense. They got pillaged in the portal. A ton of their starters are at USC now, just, following their former DC. It's going to be a transfer job like KJ Wallace from Georgia Tech, Ramon Henderson from Notre Dame, Brian Addison from Oregon. A lot of those guys are good recruits, but don't have a ton of experience. That's your secondary. That's what's going up against Hawaii. And then up for a ton too. We can talk about, like some of the NFL talent, but they're going to be relying on players that don't have a lot of experience. It's Achimapong from Miami. He hasn't played a lot. Say comes from Florida A&M. Tazamama from South Carolina. And Bosick from Navy. Like, that's your front 4 of the edge. I don't have a lot of faith in the defense, so can Hawaii just do enough? This is actually coming down, which a game I expect to be played with pace and have a lot of passing, which gives you some room for error. I don't like either defense. I'm actually considering it over here. I didn't bet it, but then when we were getting ahead of the show this morning, I'm like, holy smokes, this is already down 2 points to 54. So I don't know. We're past some key numbers. I might actually just take this live.
Yeah, again, another one where I don't really understand the movement you mentioned. I have serious questions about, transfers. When you do that, I think that your chance of success long-term is decent, but in the short term, there's a lot of work that has to be done. Like, these teams can evolve, and you'll see some of them really become solid units later in the year. This is week 1. Like, UCLA has played 0 games. Hawaii played a half a game. I don't know what exactly they're doing. They will be able to throw much more effectively in this game than the last game. I have no idea. My gut is to take the points with Hawaii, but I'm not sure I really want to do that. You mentioned the 54 and a half. They're out there at -110. So that could be an angle for this game.
I just took an over.
All
if
right.
you want to take a side, I think it's a Hawaii or pass.
Yeah, I agree with that. All right. Couple more games, and then we'll recap some best bets, and we'll get out of here as well. Appreciate everybody. This is, I think this could be the best game of the entire week. Not my favorite betting game, but a great game nonetheless. Notre Dame and Texas A&M. Fantastic matchup. These teams have serious hopes, playoff aspirations, and winning this would go a long way. You're talking about a 3-point spread. You know Notre Dame as well as anybody. What do you expect from them? And then Texas A&M, obviously serious talent, new regime. What do you expect for them?
I'm expecting Texas A&M to be a little better, and Notre Dame, I'm not 100% sure. Their coaching staff was talking about how they came out of camp without many injuries, but then I look at the O-line, they're trotting out. The entire group is made up of freshmen and sophomores. There's such little starting experience on the offensive line, and they actually have 2 players that are former starters for this team at various points, but neither was listed as a starter on the starting depth chart. So I'm not really sure what to make of that. Maybe the young players are just playing so well that they beat out those guys, but I don't know. It's a huge question. I still have questions about the passing attack. This has been a perennial problem, despite them having good recruits and good transfers. Now, they do bring in Denbrock as OC, who's been awesome at previous stops, so perhaps that's just better overall. But what is this O-line giving you in terms of run blocking and pass blocking? That's where it starts. because Texas A&M is going to bring it. They're strong up front. They have a lot of good returning production. Shamar Stewart, Shamar Turner, they anchor that unit. They have 3 guys of elite rotational ability on the defensive tackle. They bring in Rodis Johnson from Wisconsin. Their transfers at edge are amazing. You have Nick Scorton from Purdue, one of the best players in the Big Ten. Josh Kelliskar from UCF. Cassius Howell comes in he's going to be a rotational guy. He was in the MAC last year, just awesome. Linebacker, you bring in Solomon DeShields from Pitt, in addition to Tarian York. I mean, awesome unit. 3 starters back in your secondary. Everyone you brought in is either some sort of elite recruit or guy who's transferring up with strong production. Will Lee from Kansas State. He fits the guy with production. Des Ricks from Alabama, who was listed as a co-starter with him. He fits the elite recruiting profile. You know, Des Ricks played behind guys like Caleb Downs last year. So I don't think him not playing at Alabama is anything we should be all that worried about. This is a very strong Texas A&M defense. And Notre Dame having offensive questions worries me. On the other side, Notre Dame is replacing so much on defense. Ton of NFL guys. They do this close to every year, and they're always fine. So take this with a grain of salt. But J.D. Bertrand at linebacker, Maris Leafow at linebacker, DJ Brown at safety, Cam Hart at corner, Javon Jean-Baptiste on the edge, Thomas Harper at corner, Ramon Henderson transferred to UCLA, Nana Asafa-Mensah transferred out, Clarence Lewis is gone at safety. Ton of guys gone for this team. And all they did was add 3 transfers. You bring in R.J. Oben from Duke. I like that a lot. Then Jordan Clark and Rod Hurd. So it's a lot of players to replace. Texas A&M's offense, I think, is quietly very good. Wegman's been solid every time he's been on the now. Isolate some of the games he's played. It's been a lot of cupcake non-con stuff. But when he has stepped up, had an awesome game against Ole Miss a while back, I think there's promise there. They basically have 3 starting receivers back because of all the injuries last year, so a ton of experience. Even though Owens went out at running back, 2 players with starting experience at running back. You have 5 starters back on the offensive line. 2 of them weren't even listed as starters because of your high-profile transfers, like Reed Adams comes in from Kansas. This is a very good offensive line. With all those questions on both sides of the ball for Notre Dame and kind of the lack thereof for Texas A&M, I bet this very, very early on and got kind of lucky at a pick'em just with the Notre Dame injuries, but I'm still willing to take this under 3.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think A&M is a team. We talked about it in the SEC preview, like, can they take that next step? You know, what's going on with them and whatnot. But this is a spot. A lot of questions on that offensive line for Notre Dame. You talked about. I'm a Wegman fan as well. We
didn't even bring up Elko.
Yeah, and I'm a fan of. I mean, what he did. You've talked about this a lot. That guy's a genius. He's up there on the short list of guys that know what he's doing.
And he's facing his old QB.
And he's got that. You see? It's all coming together with the connections. Yeah, that guy's a stud. He wins. He's one of those coaches. He reminds me of the guy from Kansas. Everywhere he goes, he wins. The 2.5s are disappearing quickly. That's, word of warning. You may be able to still find them, but that is something to keep note of. All right, now we go. I believe this game is actually on Sunday. Is that true? I'm talking about.
We have the Sunday and the Monday game left.
Okay. So Sunday, September 1st, I'll be at a wedding.
I'm moving that day. We're both going to be out of the picture.
You're moving. I'll be at a wedding. A lot of disturbing situations, but we do what we have to. LSU and USC, 4-point spread, 64-point total. Big time programs. You mentioned to me, we were talking about some of these teams, kind of addressing. Did USC address the defensive issues and will that have repercussions here? Is it too much LSU offense? What do you see here?
Both teams tried to address their defensive issues, and I don't know how it could be worse for both teams.
That's
what
fair.
Alex Grinch did to that defense, I don't know, man. And he's now on the Wisconsin staff. Like, God, rest in peace, Hunter Wohler. Please don't ruin him. They bring in D'Anton Lynn from UCLA. He pillaged UCLA on his way out, brought in a ton of very, very good players, especially in the back end. And it's not like people were talking about, like how bad USC was and how bad they're going to be this year. USC is a very good program and they recruit well. It's not like the cupboard is barren at USC. There's a ton of really good recruits for this defense. And one example I like to use is Mason Cobb comes in via transfer. He's awesome with Oklahoma State, and then he's just immediately horrible with USC. Like, this just doesn't compute to me. And when these elite players, recruiting wise and transfer wise, something was going wrong. So I think you kind of go from the bottom end of DC to the top end of DC for USC. And I don't think they're going to be a top by any means, but I think what they have is a unit that should be above average at the very least. On the defensive line, that's probably where they're weakest. It's a huge concern against the offensive line for LSU. They do bring in Gavin Meyer and Nate Clifton. That's in addition to bringing back Bear Alexander. They bring in Easton Mascardenas Arnold from Oregon linebacker to help out the Mason Cobb, Eric Gentry situation. Their best corner, Jacoby Covington, played in 6 games last year. But man, John Humphrey, Kamari Ramsey come in from UCLA, Akili Arnold from Oregon State. This defensive backfield should be way better. So overall, just expecting defensive improvements. And I kind of think the same thing is going to happen with LSU. They go to Blake Baker, who was maximizing talent with Missouri, got a ton of guys drafted out of that secondary. It's the same thing. There's a ton of elite players on this defense, recruiting-wise. They have no business being as bad as they were on defense last year. Just inexcusable play. They had a lot of injuries in the back end, so I guess if you want to make excuses, there's some of that. Fortunately, it gave them a lot of weapons to use this year. Players with experience, Stamps, Ryan, Burns, Alexander, all have experience. Alexander's coming off the injury. But then you bring in some transfers. You have some elite recruits. Players like Jordan Allen have reportedly taken the next step. There's a lot of depth here and a lot of really high-profile recruits. Linebackers should be pretty strong. Whit Weeks, Greg Penn, Harold Perkins, they man that unit. I am about the interior up front. It's a lot of depth pieces. Like, they might have to lean on a 5-star freshman and Dominic McKinley, Gio Paez from Wisconsin. Edge, good though. I'm not sure the O-line for USC can routinely take advantage of this, but at the end of the day, I want to bet an under here. I took an under 63.5. We're expecting vast defensive improvements for both teams. Offensively, you're changing for LSU. They lose Denbrock. Everything that's come out of this camp, especially losing, like NFL receivers and stuff, is that this team's going to play multiple tight ends. Their best units, their offensive line. Their quarterback is suspect. He's had some good performances, but I mean, like, he played against a Wisconsin team that didn't have a starting corner or defensive tackle, and he had those NFL receivers, so he diced them up. Of course, that's going to happen. He actually has a lot of turnover-worthy plays. Early in the year, I think the best thing to do is hide him, try to run the ball with your awesome offensive line. So I think it's going to be slower. It's going to be run-heavy. LSU was already 74th in pace last year. USC is the explosive offense. Well, that was because of Caleb Williams. They were 93rd in pace. Better defenses, offensive questions on both sides, slower pace. I'm taking, I know it's crazy, but I'm doing it.
I love it. I'm all about this because, and we even saw this last year. I know it was different type of games, but like the Nevada game comes to mind, some of the others with USC. They were so explosive. They were not a fast team. It was all mega efficiency. And I think here, if you take away some of that explosiveness, I don't expect a big pace up spot by any stretch. So yeah, there could be turnovers. Yeah, there could be flukes, short fields. You kind of just have to live with that and somewhat baked in. I'm going to end up joining you. There's nothing I like more than rooting for nothing to happen in a game. So I'm all about that. I don't just gut feel. If you had to pick a side, what would you do?
I would bet USC, but there's no way I'm touching a spread.
I also would bet USC. I talked about that in Discord. I don't think it's going to make it though. Yeah, that's a tough game. Maybe if Tulsa wins by like 90 points and I'm rolling in it, maybe I'll sprinkle on Sunday at the wedding just to keep my life somewhat normal. All right, final game Monday, September 2nd. Obviously, the game that has been most affected by what we saw last week is Florida State. They lost to Georgia Tech. They now have no margin for error. Boston College, 15.5-point spread. This was north of 3 touchdowns not that long ago. Did the pendulum swing too much? I like Boston College in life, but are we overdoing how bad Florida State is, or is this now an appropriate spread?
I think we're getting close. I was very, very to take this game before kickoff last week. I have a 21.5. But man, what a bad performance from Florida State. And I mean, Boston College is a team that's built to take advantage of this team from what we saw. And I don't want to react that much, but It's concerning. Boston College, let's start there. So they have Bill O'Brien as your head coach. Will Lawing, he was the Patriots tight ends coach last year. He's their OC, and Tim Lewis is their DC. He was the Arlington Renegades co-DC. There's a lot of questions with this coaching staff. I'm not going to lie, especially how old school Bill O'Brien wants to mesh this offense with a skill set like Tom Castellanos, who's basically just a dual threat quarterback. That's a big concern for me. I don't know how it's going to look, but I'm not sure it matters a ton. When you look at BC and how they're built, as long as Bill O'Brien has any sort of brain power left, he should realize his strength is up front. They have 4 offensive linemen back. That unit was very good for this team last year and is going to be very good again. They should run the ball. They added Trayshawn Ward. They still have Kai Robichaud back. This is the best element of their team. Castellanos is an elite dual threat quarterback. This offensive line, Georgia Tech, that is, was pushing Florida State around. Florida State could not get stops. The stat was crazy. It was something like the final 20 minutes of the game, Georgia Tech held the ball for like 17 of those minutes. With like 5 minutes left in the third quarter, FSU had 1 more possession the entire game. That's how well Georgia Tech played keep away against this team. I think you could reasonably argue that this is a better offensive line than what Georgia Tech put on the field. It's at least more experience, and we know what we're getting. So that's a huge concern. And then what do we do with DJ Uiagalelei in this offense? Everyone's seen the stat. All right, he had negative air yards in the first half. He cleaned it up a little bit in the second half, but there's still a lot of problems with the passing attack. The offensive line was not as good as we thought it was going to be. And what Georgia Tech did was they just brought an extra defender into the box because there was no threat of the pass. So, yeah, you can have an awesome offensive line. We saw it on the first drive. They went right down the field. But as soon as Georgia Tech corrected, I mean, it's hard to block 7 guys when you have 5 offensive linemen. It's just easy math. So can Uiagalelei, these receivers, explain that? I have a ton of questions. Uiagalelei was straight up bad. His receivers were straight up bad. So bad that they were using 2 running backs on the field almost every play. It honestly kind of looked like some of the old Memphis offenses that Norvell had. You had players like Toafili lining up wide. And with that, they still weren't pushing the ball down the field. So I just don't know what we're getting out of the offense. Severe limitations at receiver and quarterback. When you look at the defense for Boston College, they're pretty strong up front. They should have no problem generating pressure. Everyone in their front 7 is back aside from linebacker. They have some concerns there, I will say, but overall, I think it's still a decent unit. In the back end, they bring in a lot of transfers. Ryan Turner, Cam Martinez, Bryce Brown, all that should help. But I just don't know that FSU can exploit that. That was also the weakness of Georgia Tech, their back end. And these are some pretty good transfers, like Martinez and Turner are from Ohio State. So I'm not sure that there's a significant weakness in Georgia Tech's back end. It's just, in Boston College's back end. It's just unproven. So yeah, I don't know. It's Boston College or pass, but I just have a lot of questions about this Florida State offense, and there's a lot of adjustments that need to be made if they're going to live up to expectations or even remotely close to them.
Yeah, this game got ruined for me. Simple as that. It just, I would have ended up I would have bet Boston College in the right situation. Now it's just kind of a mess because I don't know, but we'll see. You mentioned, I think Boston College can cause some issues, but what a hard thing to quantify, losing in Ireland and now coming home, kind of licking your wounds. So it will be an interesting game. We have some extra time because it is a Monday game.
I'd probably pass at this number 2 just for what it's worth. I kind of hyped them up. That was at 21.5.
That's what I mean. Like, different situation, real different situation. All right. We talked about a bunch of games, and again, I will just say it one last time for everybody. If you're a college football fan, come on in. Go to the Insider Marketplace. You've got me. You've got Gajewski. You've got some others as well. Pick the person, pick the tools, pick the whatever that works for you. We want you involved. Again, it's a great season. It's a long season. We want to make it a profitable one. So those links are below, and they're for you guys. Get involved here in the Odd Chopper Marketplace. But let's recap what we just did. Say it to you every single week. Okay. Went through bets. Top of the board. First clicks. Building out the card. What are they? I stunned you. I'm going to build out my card then because you are frozen. First clicks for me. Now, I want to be clear, very clear, that Tulsa is not my favorite bet. at 33.5. But if you could get 31, it would be on the card effectively. Now, going down. Haven't bet them yet, but Miami, -2.5 in particular. The threes are coming. If you can get this inside 3, it's an absolute game that I want to explore. Looking at a Thursday game, one that I already have on the card for me, Jacksonville State -2.5. I like this squad. We talked about what they want to do naturally, which is run it down Coastal's throat. I believe that they can do just that. So you put them up against an unproven front for the Chanticleers. I'm going to give you Jacksonville State on my card, and then I'm going to steal one because he's not here. I can kind of just steal it and claim it as my own. I'm going to give you the Virginia Tech under. It's not one that I was honestly considering. Try to find, obviously, every little point helps. And let me see if I can just shop this real quickly. Virginia Tech, 50s.5. Okay, there's 50.5s out there. I'm going to take that one. And look who's back. I'm claiming Virginia Tech under as my own right now for this. I like that. You talked about Vanderbilt can't really do anything. I think that could really stall out. So I'm going to give you Jacksonville State. I'm going to give you Miami. And I'm going to give you the under in this Virginia Tech Vanderbilt game.
Well done. Those are 3 of my favorites. And
that's why I took them.
Thank goodness I'm moving on Sunday, so we'll get this Wi-Fi situation figured out, and I will be hardwired in the future. I like A&M. I think anything under 3 is fine. LSU-USC under 63.5 is fantastic. You might be able to find a 64 out there. I think that is fine too.
64.5 is on my screen.
That is not available to me, but I would gladly take that. Those would be the 2 I would add.
Beautiful, beautiful stuff. Again, just an awesome week of college football, and we're just getting started. There's a lot of blowout games, and we hope to talk about some of them on Thursday. It's going to be an absolute treat to get into the weeds on that, but these are some of the marquee ones. We hope you guys enjoyed it. Again, you can listen here on YouTube, download that podcast feed, rate and review, by the way. It really helps us out, and we can't appreciate it anymore. Thanks again for supporting the show, supporting Betting You, and supporting OddsShopper. So on that note, for me and for Matt and for all of us here, good luck, friends. Let's cash some tickets and get started on a hot streak. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon.